This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, I'm going to have Shabbos Rabbi Parshas Chayei, continuing on in our series on the Haftorahs of the Parsha. The Haftorah of Parshas Chayei is the beginning of Sofer Malachim. Sofer Malachim is an excellent Sofer, highly recommended. Even though it comes without any haskamos, nevertheless, it's still kedai to open it up once in a while. Sofer Malachim, one of the books of God. God is the one who created us. He gave us the Torah on Har Sinai, and we do what He says, right? And He takes care of us. So, and He tells us in this week's Haftorah, in Sofer Malachim, the beginning of Malachim, the Hamelech Dovid Zakein Ba Bayamim Vayichasu Ba Begadim. So right off the bat, we see the connection to the Parsha. The pasuk V'Avram Zakein Bayamim V'Hashem Beirach Es Avraham Ba Kyle. Okay, very nice. So that's the connection. But let's get the story down, and then we'll dig in a little bit. This is the end of David HaMelech's life. David HaMelech had an illness where he was very cold, and he couldn't be warmed. He was very cold, he couldn't be warmed. So they said to him, we're going to seek out for the master a beautiful girl. She'll stand before the king. She will be his accountant, and she will keep him warm. Basically, the story in a nutshell is like this. We'll tell people that she's your accountant, but she'll serve a different purpose, okay? And the only thing was, David HaMelech couldn't really live with her, and he didn't live with her, because he's already married to 18 wives, and he already was maxed out. So there was an option, maybe he should divorce one of his wives, to which the Gemara says, the Chachamim hitiru lai liyached, v'lo hitiru lai legaresh. They allowed him to violate Isra Rabbanan of Yichud with this woman, Avishag Hashunamis, who, by the way, most people don't know, Avishag Hashunamis was the sister of the Isha Hashunamis from last week. So if you want to know why Chayei is after Vayera we talk about sister one, and Chayei we talk about the other sister. Okay? But be it as it may, she was the sister of the Isha Hashunamis, and she was the most beautiful woman in Eretz Yisrael. And they brought her to the king. And she was his accountant, and David did not live with her. But that's not the main part of the story. The main part of the story is David had a son, Adonijah. You should be looking, it's kedai to have a Chumash. Now, it's interesting, and maybe we'll get to, sometimes he's called Adonijah, and sometimes he's called Adoniyahu, which is also curious. And he was, right now, the oldest son of David. How's that? The oldest son was Avshalom, but Avshalom was killed already. So now you have Adonijah, you have Kilav, and Shlomo was the youngest. And Adonijah ben Chagis was raising himself, saying, I will reign, I'm going to be the king. And he made for himself horses and cavalry, 50 people running before him. Okay, so basically now there's a limit of how many horses you're allowed to have. The thing is, remember we say a king could sometimes max out, but there's something called he could be grandfathered in. What if you had more wives before or more horse before? So Rabbi Yonasan says, you sort of grandfather it in once you became king. So in preparation for him becoming king, he already was, amassing his horse collection. David never saddened him by saying, why'd you do this? He was very good looking, and he was the one who was born after Avshalom. Meaning, the reason he was able to get away with this, with these acting out his dreams of becoming the king, is David HaMelech never stopped him from doing whatever he wanted. So basically he was never disciplined, and he figured David is going along with it, so he continued on the program. Now, there are different ways of saying it, I guess. Okay, so just on this pasuk, we have a beautiful pshat over here, a wondrous pshat that the Ben Ish Chai and the Berachas Chaim brings down, also brought in the Sefer Tzavarei Shalal, and he says like this. David was a chassid and a tzaddik. Why did he never reprimand Adoniyahu? So the Berachas Chaim brings down from Rabbi Yonasan, And the truth is, the Chida and the Tzavarei Shalal says this pshat, and I think he says it in a even more incredible way. And he says like this: we all know Lama Nismacha ben Sofer Umayra in the Torah to the Parsha Yifas Tayar, to teach you that anyone who marries a Yifas Tayar is going to have a kid who's a ben Sofer Umara. So the answer is like this. You can only reprimand your kid if your kid doesn't have an answer. If you ask your kid, hey kid, why didn't you learn something? Why are you watching television? If the kid's going to say back, well, Daddy, you're watching television. That's why. So you can't even begin to reprimand the kid. You can't be moichiach a child something that he could answer you back. So the Torah says like this: V'loyat savay avav miyamav. His father never reprimanded him. Says the Chida, what does the fact that he was good looking have to do with it? It says he never reprimanded him. Why? Because he was toiv toyar ma'oid. What does that got to do with the price of tea in China? The answer is Adoniya was from a Yifas Toyar. Chagis was Yifas Toyar. So if he's from the ben of Yifas Toyar, Dovid wanted to reprimand him, but if he reprimands Adoniya, Adoniya's going to say right back, so why'd you marry the Yifas Toyar? And what's Dovid going to say? I think I'm getting a phone call now, right? So therefore, now, so the Torah is saying like this: V'loyat savay aviv miyamav. The father never gave him Musar mishum lemar. The reason because lemar the yoimru lo the Dovid Amech ma'adua kacha asis. Why'd you do this? Nasav Yifas Toyar. Why didn't you darshan smuchim? Because Adoniya was a toiv Toyar ma'oid. He comes from Yifas Toyar, and therefore he was born after Avshalom. In other words, let's read the pasuk like this. This is how the Chida and the Ben Ish Chai read the pasuk. V'loyat savay miyamav. His father never reprimanded him. You know why? Lamar! Because he would say to Dovid, Madua kacha asis? Why'd you do this? You're telling me? Why'd you do this? And furthermore, he says, V'gam hu toiv toyar ma'oid. Adoniya was from Yifas Toyar. So he would have just said right back to Dovid.
How do you know that? Where does it say that Dovid married a Yifas Toyar?
He did. This Chagas. Where does it say that?
What is also your mother? Do we need that?
Why maybe, he doesn't really explain that so well. But maybe the point is, just like Avshalom was born from Yifas Toyar, that's well known. Avshalom was born from Yifas Toyar. In fact, the Ba'aturim in Parshas Kiseitze says, I think that Avshalom is Gematria ben Sofer Umayra. So the point is, just like Avshalom was from Yifas Toyar, just like Avshalom was born after Yifas Toyar, so too Adoniya. Okay, let's continue with the storyline. Now,
also has a sort of a strange background.
Oh, we're definitely coming to that. We're definitely coming to that. Now, who was on the side of Adoniya? He was friends with Yoav ben Tzruya and with Avyasar HaKohen. They both helped Adoniya. Why were they on Adoniya's side? Because they both sort of figured they're out of favor with David HaMelech. Yoav killed Avshalom. Yoav killed some other chief executives in David's household. So Yoav felt that David has gripes against him, which he did. So he figured if Shlomo ever becomes the king, they're going to knock him off. So to save his own skin, he figured he's better off siding with Adoniya. Likewise, Avyasar HaKohen was overlooked to become the Kohen Gadol. Who did David appoint? Tzadok HaKohen. So Avyasar figures he has no shot if Shlomo becomes king of ever being Kohen Gadol. He has a better shot with Adoniyahu. So therefore they both side with Adoniyahu. Now Tzadok HaKohen and Benayahu ben Yehoyada and Nasan HaNavi and Shimi ben Gera, they're on David's side. Why is Shimi ben Gera? But Shimi ben Gera was the one who cursed David. Yeah, but David didn't do anything. So he figured his only shot in saving his skin, if later somebody wants to take revenge, is to showing allegiance to David now and to Shlomo now. In other words, he figures if he goes against Shlomo, if Shlomo would ever become the king one day and knock him off. This way, if he shows allegiance to Shlomo when times are tough, maybe he'll save his own skin. Okay, these are the superficial motives over here. Okay. Anyway, Vayizvach. So we have to go through the story very quickly. So Adoniah sacrificed offerings, sheep, cattle, fattened calves with by Ein Roigel, and he called all of the brothers and all the Anshe Yehuda. And who do you think he didn't invite? He didn't invite Nasan, he didn't invite Benayahu, and obviously he didn't invite Shloimeh, right? That's clear. Fine. So Nasan comes to Bathsheba, Shlomo's mother. He said, Herzchain, did you hear that Adoniah ben Chagis is making himself king? Dovid doesn't even know. And now, come, I will give you advice, you'll save your soul and the soul of Shlomo. Because if Adoniah ever becomes king, the first two people he's knocking off are Bathsheba and Shlomo. Come with me to the king. Say to the king as follows. King, you swore to your maidservant, which Dovid did. Dovid swore to Bathsheba, Ki Shlomo b'nech yimlech acharai, that Shlomo will be the next king and he'll sit on my throne. Why is Adoniah ruling? And here's the plan. While you're speaking to him, I'm going to come in. You're going to speak to him, and I'm going to knock on the door. And while you're in the middle of speaking to him, David's going to say, "Oh, no, son, what are you here for?" And I'm going to back you up, and it's going to be like this, secret plot to convince David, this incredibly planned out, brilliant scheme that while you're in the middle of speaking, I'm going to knock on the door, and that's going to be, this is this most brilliant scheme, incredible. Instead of us both going together, you're going to start, and I'm going to knock on the door while you're in the middle of speaking, and that's the most brilliant plan ever. What's the big ga'inus over here? So Bathsheba comes to the room, and the king is very old, and Avishag Shunamis is the one serving him. Basically, Bathsheba was not needed anymore. For living, right? For Tashmish, David was too old. For service...
he's 70 when he passed away, right?
70 is very, very, very old.
Oh,
right? Once you're... What? No, basically David was too old.
he's in bad shape, maybe.
Anyway, he was,
These days, 80 is the new 65.
Yeah.
Those days, 70.
I don't mean you guys are, in perfect shape. David at that, so David had no.
David only had 7 years to begin.
David, by the way, David at this time had no reason to have Bathsheba. Tashmish was not possible, and he didn't need her to serve him. He had Avishag. So basically Bathsheba wasn't coming in. So all of a sudden Bathsheba comes in, and she bows down to the king. Now, women don't bow down to their husbands. Regular women don't bow down to their husbands. One second. That doesn't usually happen. So the king's like, what do you need? Right? What do you want? What do you need? In other words, what are you even doing here? Bichlal. And now you're bowing down to me? The king realized she wanted something, right? So she says, you swore to me that Shlomo will be the king, and he's going to sit on the throne, and now Adoniah made himself king, and you don't even know about it. And he shechted karbonos, and he called all the Bnei Melech, and the proof is, he invited Avyasar, the guy who you passed over to be Kohen Gadol, and he invited Yoav, and he invited Shlomo. So therefore, Bathsheba says, all the eyes of Israel are upon you to tell them who's going to sit on the throne. And what's going to happen when you die? Me and Shlomo, they're going to kill us. We're going to be considered sinners. Think about this, David. If you pass over Shlomo and you make Adoniah the king, people are going to say you passed over Shlomo because he's an illegitimate son. So, as she's speaking, Nasan Hanavi came, and Nasan Hanavi says, they told the king, Nasan's here, and Nasan bows down. And Nasan says to the king, you said... Nasan has another way. He didn't say Adoniah is making himself king. He said, David, did you proclaim Adoniah king? Sort of, he wanted to make it seem like he thought that that David had allowed Adoniah to proclaim himself king. Did you say he should sit on your throne? Because by the way, you know what he did today, and you know who he called today? And he didn't invite me or Tzaddik and Benayo and Shlomo. He probably did this because you told him. But my question is, why didn't you tell me that you told him that he's going to be the next king. Which the Chasam Sofer is going to ask, Dovid has to tell Nasan who he decided the next king is going to be. Listen to what Nasan said. Nasan didn't say, you swore to Bathsheba that Shlomo was going to be the next king. He could have said that. Nasan could have said, you're a liar, Dovid, because you swore to Bathsheba. No. Nasan says, Adoni is making himself king. Probably you told him. Why didn't you tell me first? Understand? Do you imagine you go over to Trump? You should have told me you're going to Pittsburgh on Thursday. I didn't know where you were. He's achroi to tell you where he's going. Why does he have to tell you? David's achroi to the Navi to tell the Navi where he's going. He's not achroi.
He meant he's a Navi. He meant he's not supposed to be king. I know a Navi. What do you wait? He's not supposed to be king. That's a Navi that was not supposed to be king.
No, but he didn't say. He said, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" So, meaning, if God told you, this is the point. If Hashem told you he should be king, why didn't you tell me? Because as we're going to see, that Rabbi Yonasan Eibishter says that if Hashem tells a Navi something good is going to happen, it has to come true, right? And if it doesn't come true, he's a Navi Sheker. Now, I never knew this. It doesn't have to come true. It's not true. Not everything Hashem tells a Navi has to be. Hashem could sometimes go and tell another Navi, you know what? I changed my mind. I decided not to make it happen. I didn't know that. I didn't know this halacha. I thought if Hashem tells a Navi something's going to happen, it must happen. So it could be Hashem went after he told Nasan, because Hashem did tell Nasan that Shlomo was going to be the next king. Hashem then maybe went to Dovid and said, never mind, let's go with Adoniah. The thing is, Nasan said, but at the very least, you needed to have told me so I don't look like a Navi Sheker. That's what Nasan's time is going to be. Okay. So Dovid says, no, actually...
David was a Navi?
No, he wasn't a Navi. Was Dovid a Navi?
No, so how does this halakha apply that he tells another Navi?
He could have gotten Nevuah. He could have gotten Nevuah. I don't know that he's one of the men, Ches Nevi'im. I don't remember. Yeah. So the Dovid says like this, Call Bathsheba. Apparently Bathsheba stepped out for a moment, and she stands before the king with Nasan, and Dovid swears by the life of the Lord who redeemed me, that just like I swore to you that Shlomo is going to be the king, I confirm that Shvuah today, and Bathsheba bows down, and she says, Yichi Adoni HaMelech David L'Olam. Long live the king. So the question is one simple and important question. That Nasan HaNavi said, I have a great idea. You're going to start talking to the king, and while you're in the middle of talking, I'm going to knock on the door just then, and like that combination of unusual circumstance, that while you're talking to the king, I happen to come in and tell the king the same thing, that's going to really shock him. I mean, you got to be kidding me. That's the big plan? Why did they have to come separately? What's the big go'iness of coming separately? Just come. The two of them should come. Bathsheba should say, look, you swore to me. God should say, God told me. So what are you doing? What's the Indian? They have to come separately. Okay? That's a very important question. We're going to give two answers to that. Answer number one is the Malbim. The Malbim says in number 6 that the wise people say, in order to make a mark on someone, in order to influence someone, you gotta hit them on different angles. You can't just say, you know what? Adoniah is the king. It's not correct because Adoniah doesn't look good in a crown. You need to hit the person with many arguments. So the plan of Nasan HaNavi was really, first, if we both come together, it's like, I remember two people once sat down with me about something, in Rabbanos. One of them had Taina A, and one of them had Taina B. But they realized they both contradicted each other. So I said, you know what? You guys fight it out. When you decide what you want, then you decide. You let me know what to do. One guy wanted to be more strict, and one guy more lenient. But the one thing they knew, the common denominator is that the rabbi is not correct. But the two of them had different ideas how to do it. So I say, you know what? I think both of you agree about one thing, that this is the middle way to do it, So the Malbim says like this, if you want to influence somebody, you got to present an array of arguments. The argument of Bathsheba, see, sometimes a person will be influenced out of jealousy and anger. So if you want to get somebody to oppose something, you could appeal you hear what this person's doing, you could try to get them jealous and get them angry. Sometimes you want them to stop it, you could magnify the chait. Sometimes you could appeal to their sense of shame. Nasan's idea was like this. Sheva wanted to magnify the sin of Adoniah, that Adoniah is gathering the men and he's going to invite Shlomo and he's trying to usurp the throne. And the argument of Nasan was that he was appealing to Dovid's sense of busha. He said, Dovid, how could you allow to do this? Don't you know that the Navi, I'm the Navi, and God said that Shlomo's going to be the next king? Don't you know you swore Shlomo's next king? So in other words, they had different arguments. She was appealing to magnify the sin of Adoniah, and therefore he felt it's better that they come separately. And they both want to be there at the same time, but it wouldn't be proper, it wouldn't be effective to present the arguments simultaneously. This way they could appeal to different sides of the issue.
It's not
Okay.
obvious that they're in cahoots.
Okay. Rabbi said, what?
It's not obvious that they're working together if they come separately.
I guess that's a Pashup shot, yeah.
Didn't Hakadosh Baruch Hu tell David that Shlomo was going to build a Beis Hamikdash? And if he was going to build a Beis Hamikdash, how could he do it if he wasn't a Melech?
Okay. But David didn't know. David wasn't changing. He didn't change. It's just that he wasn't aware of what Adoniah was doing. Okay, Rabbi said, what I want to present to you, this is the main element of this subject, is the Chasam Sofer has an incredible pshat in what transpired over here. Really a pilpul and a very, very powerful idea. And we're number 8. We know that Shlomo's mother was Sheva. The problem is, Dovid lived with Sheva seemingly when she was married to Uriah. I mean, she was a married woman at some point, and Dovid took her. And the question is, Dovid ultimately married her. And the halacha is that if you're mezana with a woman who's married, echad labal v'echad labaya, you're asur to her. So the question is, how was Dovid allowed to marry Sheva and live with her beheter? He had already lived with her l'chayro, and she was married to Uriah. This is the question of the Gemara, and the Gemara in Ksubis says, "V'chitema ma'isa shahaya mipnei ma lo yasruha." The story that happened with Dovid, why wasn't Sheva asur to him? Says the Gemara, Hasam oinasu. The first answer of the Gemara is he raped her. It was not with consent. He forced her. And the halacha that you're asur to the boyel is only if it's baratzain. But if it's ba'oines, that's what the Gemara says. Don't ask me. The Gemara says that he lived with her ba'oines. In fact, yeah, the Chidah says yes. The Chidah says yes. Shaus Chuvas Chaim Shoal. Chidah says it was ba'oines. She might have been a katana. But that's the first answer of the Gemara. And according to the Chasam Sofer, the din if someone is ma'anis, a married woman, we don't say echad labal v'echad labayah. That's the first answer of the Gemara. It's a Gemara. You knew this Gemara. I'm not telling you any chedushim. It's a well-known Gemara. The Gemara's first answer is ba'oines. V'ibai seima, she wasn't married. Why? Because Uriah went out to war. And the halacha is kol hayoytzer l'melchemes beis Dovid, get krisus kaisev leishta. Anyone who goes out to war writes a document of divorce for their wife. D'chsev yes achicha tifkad l'shalom ves aruvasam tikach. My ves aruvasam tikach tan Rav Yosef dvar muravim beinoi lebeina. So you write a document of divorce. Now here's the question that the Rishonim deal with: that the divorce is only on condition that the person survives. It's only on condition the person dies. So if the person dies, if he doesn't come back, she's divorced.
Retroactively to when he...
Retroactively. The problem was, Uriah would have made it. So what did Dovid do? He sent him to the front lines to make sure that he wouldn't come back and render her a muteres l'mafreya.
But he's even no gay about David here. How could he be muteres?
So that means it would come out that Dovid lived with her b'safek eshes ish. So how could David live with her? I mean,
he resolved the suffix by killing...
How does it help that if somebody writes a document of divorce for their wife, that if they don't come back, they're divorced retroactively, but at this point in time, Uriah was alive? So Rabbeinu Tam says that no, there's no retroactive divorce. It's not on condition. When people would go out to war, they would just divorce straight on. The Rabbeinu Tam argues with the Rishonim. Other Rishonim say that the person gets divorced al Tanai. Rabbeinu Tam says there's no Tanai. That the warriors, the soldiers in the Israeli army back in the day would all divorce their wives. So the Gemara, so Tosfos asks, why does the Gemara call her a Safek Eishes Ish? Because nobody knew that she divorced, that he divorced his wife, because they used to do it privately.
But if everyone did it, it had to be common knowledge.
Says the Gemara, says Tosfos, it was considered a Safek Eishes Ish because the people didn't know about it. But it wasn't on condition, it was straight out. So basically, there are two answers in the Gemara. Listen very carefully. You ready? How was Dovid mutter to Sheva? Answer number one, he was ma'anas her. Answer number two, she was divorced. Says the Chasam Sofer, both answers need each other. Both answers are true. If you want to know, I have a question, Dovid. How could you live with Sheva, but nobody knows that she's divorced? Are you you're allowed to live with a woman that nobody knows that she's divorced? Does that make any sense? Dovid lived with her. Why? What's the second answer of the Gemara? Because she was divorced. But nobody knew that. Imagine a gadol b'Yisrael is getting married to one. We say, what are you doing? Don't worry, have cheshbonos. But nobody knows the woman is divorced. It doesn't work that way. There's something called marasayin. How could Dovid live with Sheva? Nobody knows she's divorced. You need both answers of the Gemara. Everyone knew that Dovid could marry Sheva because in everybody else's mind, Dovid was ma'anas her. So that's the heter. Nobody needs to know about the divorce because as far as people know, Dovid was ma'anis Sheva and therefore he could live with her.
So if you rape somebody, that's a chus. You're allowed to live with a lady.
Yeah, maybe I should not put up the second share. I don't know. But I have a better, I'll put up both. This way that will mask the first. Nobody will realize that the first share.
He'll be so angry at you about this.
It's a Gemara. I don't understand. No, it's a Gemara. There's nothing like okay. So Chasam Sofer says like this. You ready? Listen carefully. What did people think when Dovid married Sheva? That he was ma'anas her. But if you want to know what the real reason why Dovid married Sheva, it's because Sheva was divorced. And he was never... We asked, was Dovid ma'anas Sheva? Of course not! He persuaded her. He seduced her. Baratzai. But how could he do it? Because she's divorced. So we need both answers of the Gemara. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. Dovid knew this was David's rule. It's David's Mochemes mitzvah.
Melch's allowed to marry a grusha?
Yeah. So listen carefully. If you want to know why did people think that Dovid married Sheva, he was ma'anas her. If you want to know why Dovid really married Sheva, it's because she was divorced. But she did it baratzain. Now, how did Dovid get a married woman to live with him baratzain? Now, she wasn't married, but what was David's sell? What was his, what was his selling point?
Sales pitch.
His sales pitch? He promised her, he said, marry me, and our son will be the next king of Israel. She said, deal. But you think anyone in their right mind, you think they told anybody that David seduced her and convinced her to live with him on condition that their child was going to be the next king of Israel? Of course not. First of all, nobody knew about the divorce. So what the world felt was that he was ma'anas her. Therefore, there's only one person in the world who knew that Dovid promised Sheva that their son would be the next king of Israel. Who? Sheva. She never told anyone about that. You think she would have told somebody, by the way, you know how he seduced me? It's Dvarim Beino LeBeino. It's not sneos to reveal. Nobody knew. Avada the Navi knew, but the Navi would never say. It's not sneos to say how David was Mefateh Sheva. As far as the Navi knew, David was Ma'anis Sheva. Just the Navi knew that God told him that Shlomo would be the next king of Israel. Therefore, Nasan was being very sensitive and very smart. He said, you go in by yourself and you whisper to him, hey dude, hey pal, Remember what you told me? And he's looking around. Don't worry, nobody's here. Nobody's here. Don't think Nassan's here. He's not here yet. Maybe he'll be here soon. But I'm telling you that everybody thinks the first answer in the Gemara in Kesubos that you were ma'anis me. But we both know the truth. You were ma'anis me. I did it baratzon because you promised me that Shlomo would be the next king of Israel. And therefore, I'm letting you know secretly that you promised me. You can't back out of your shvuah. Nassan comes in, he knocks on the door. Okay, Hakol Beseder over here. Nassan comes in, he makes himself Vissendik. I don't know what you guys were talking about. As far as I know, you were ma'anis her, and that's why she's mutter, and you never promised her anything. I don't know about any promises you made to her. I know what God told me. That was the chachma, says the Chasam Sofer, of why Nassan had them come in separately. Because had he gone in with Bathsheba would not have been able to tell Dovid that you promised me when we did it baratzon. Because that wouldn't have been appropriate for Bathsheba to say. But what was Nassan's argument? His argument was, one thing I know is, God told me. Now listen carefully. Take a look in the Chasam Sofer number 10. This is in the Torah's Moshe Hashalem. So you're going to open up your Torah's Moshe and say, oh, what the Rabbi said, it's not there. He always claims he has sources, and it's not. No, I'm telling you now. It's in the Torah's Moshe Hashalem. Okay? It's in a new edition. On the Haftorah, Vayomer Nassan al Ba'ashala im shom l'chi uvay el hamelech v'ani avay acharecha milesi yesh li diak. Lama tsiva Nassan lebasheva shetelach levada tchila lemelech v'ani avay acharecha umilesias. Dvarecha ma milehu yoiser bedvarav mimashu amar. Number one, what did Nassan say that she didn't say? What was the big chachma here? Number two, gam lachar echi tachin leimer lemelech kedivrei Nassan hanavi. He said, why? You told Adoniah, why didn't you tell me? The king has to tell the Navi what he wants to do. Says the Heilig Chasam Sofer, look in the Gemara in Kesubos, why wasn't David answered to Bathsheba? The Gemara gives two answers. Number one, he was ma'anis her. Number two, he gave her a get. Uriah gave her a get. Rabbeinu Tam says there was no Tanai over here. Says the Heilig Chasam Sofer, these two terutzim of Shas are shaykh lahadadi. He says the truth was, it was Baratzain Gamor. He persuaded her, he seduced her. You know how he seduced her? By swearing to her that their kid would be the next king. But nobody knew how he seduced her. The world thought that that he was ma'anis her, right? Va'amru lahem sheba'onis nivala. Dovid told the world that he was ma'anis her, and he told her the world, the chiddush of the Chasam Sofer, that when you're ma'anis a woman, it's mutter lebayal. Fine. According to this,
how would the king openly admit, as he's a king, that he's going to be honest a woman? He had 17 wives. He's going to be honest. How's a king honest a woman?
So if you open up Psalms chapter 51, there's a chapter Dovid HaMelech wrote doing tshuva for what he did to Bathsheba. Lam Natzeh is
Why did he
David.
do it in the first place? He's the king.
Kol hagado mechaveroi yitzor gadol. The answer is he didn't do anything wrong. No, the answer is he didn't do anything wrong. You know why? Because we have two answers in the Gemara. Because she was divorced. She was divorced. That's why.
He just said that he told Bnei Yisrael they was ma'anisar. Oh, because and he's allowed to be ma'anisar because she's divorced. Can't be ma'anisar.
No, he didn't say he was allowed to do it. He was ma'anisar, a married woman. That's what he told her. What should he? He told them the truth, but he didn't tell them that she was divorced. The people who knew. You know. Fine.
They got another point I don't understand. How could you promise his son to be a king? You know about Tzadikim.
He must have known Baruch HaKodesh, that his son Shlomo.
So he made a view that he doesn't know.
He didn't know he was going to have a son.
What?
He couldn't have known he was going to have a son.
I guess he did know. If he told her, he must have known. I mean,
That's the daily.
but listen. You know, was this an empty promise, a real promise? I guess it David. Okay, listen to what he says. So he promised her, he swore to her, that because of the toiva that he's going to do to her, he said, be accede to my request, and I'm going to give you a son. Now, that shavua, he could be mater. You know how he could be mater that shavua? We have to add a few more details here. He could be mater. If he swore to her that you live with me on condition that I give you a son, She could be matter the shvua if she says, I'm Michael. You don't have to give it to me. But he's going to need her ratzain. But he could not say that before the whole world. Because the world thought that he was ma'anas her, and he never did a taiva to her. Meaning like this. The world thought he was ma'anas her, and anything that he promised her, he could be mater by doing hataras nadarim. So listen carefully. There are two things that could have happened. If she agreed to live with him on condition that he would give her a son, she's the only one who could be meichel that promise. If he just was ma'anas her, and he said, by the way, I'm going to give you a son, then he could be mater neder with any chacham. The problem is that you can't just go to any chacham, you need to go to the Gadol Hadar, like we find by Pinchas and Yiftach, that if there's a mumcha badar, there's no rishus to anybody else to mater the neder. Right? Chazal say, Pinchas was choyte, he should have gone to Yiftach to be mater the neder. He could have gone to somebody else. So we see from here that you have no rishus to mater nedarim, unless if the Mara da Asra is there. So listen to this, last paragraph. V'nei haya Dovid roitze lahater nidroi. If Dovid wanted to be mater the neder, he could have said to Nasan Hanavi to mater the neder because he's a mumcha. But here's the problem. If Dovid would have called Nasan, and Nasan would have been mater the neder, it really wouldn't have done Dovid good. Because Nasan could only be mater the neder if he was ma'anas her. And she didn't agree to anything. But Dovid knew she did agree. So if she did agree, we need her to be Michael. So there's no other way to be mater the neder than if she goes by herself. So he says like this: If Nasa knew that the Maisa was Bertsoina and a Shvua, so then Dovid had no way to be mater it. But the problem is, the only way to be mater it is if she agrees to. But in the king's courtyard, nobody's gonna. How could anybody make known the king's private geschäft? So therefore, says Chasam Sofer, the go'oinus of Nasan was, she tells Baal Sheva, you go to the king by yourself, and you say to the king, you swore to me that Shlomo is going to be the next king, and the king is going to know that he did in order to get her to live with him. And therefore, I'm going to come after you, and I'm going to ask the king, was there a heter to your shvua? Meaning, this was the double angle of Bathsheba was like this. Bathsheba comes to Dovid, and he's going to tell Dovid, you lived with me baratzain. If you lived with me baratzain, then if you want to be mater your neder, you needed to have asked me mechila. Did you ever ask me mechila? Now that's not something Bathsheba could have asked if Nasan was standing there. And then Nasan's going to come in, making himself nishvisendik, knowing that Dovid, making believe Dovid was ma'anas her. And if Dovid was ma'anas her, then technically he could have been mater neder, but not without the permission of Nasan, because Nasan is the Gadol Hadar. So he had to go to Nasan. But if Nasan would have been there when Bathsheba was there, Bathsheba would never have been able to give her, the real punch. That Dovid, you know that you did a beratzain and you swore to me, you're going to give me a kid, and that's not a neder, you could have been mater. Who was mater? Your neder. That's why Nasan needed Bathsheba to go in by herself without him being there. Otherwise, she couldn't have spilled the beans and said these words, that you promised it to me, so who is mater? Your neder. And ultimately David said, look, I wasn't mater my neder, I don't rescind, Shlomo's going to be the next king. And that's how the Chasam Sofer learns the issue will just end. The way the Malbim explains it, what's the last thing she says? Long live the king. What's that all about? Very pashut. Here she comes in and she says, hey David, we just wanted to know, we were just wondering, when you drop dead, who's going to be the next king? I mean, it's not really a nice thing to ask the king. We really need to know right now. Here he's lying there, he's a chayla. Imagine you go to a chayla. By the way, chayla, who's going to get your your best stocks when in a few minutes.
Think that never
You know,
happens?
you think,
I think so.
you know, is that that's not really the nice thing to say to somebody who's sick. So she wanted to make it like, look, everybody dies one day. We're not expecting you to die. We're just asking, should the day ever rise? But avada, yechi hamelech el ha'olam, meaning long live the king. We're not worried. We're not suspecting. You're going to live a nice long life. We just wanted to know. That's how the Malbim explains. Okay, Rabbi Say, Agun Shabbos. What?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.